Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Noah. As usual, this is Ben, who has been behind the camera for the beginning of Marksman Research here, but we're doing something different now. We're doing podcast style, talking about the small microcap stocks that we love and enjoy, and talk about companies that we've often, gotten fortunate and had the opportunity to talk with management. So I want to give Ben a minute here to introduce himself, and we're gonna go ahead and dive into a new type of podcast. So.
Sure. Thank you, Noah. Excited to hop on the screen here finally. I've been doing the research behind the scenes. Me and Noah took a little bit of a break here, but are coming back with what we think is a great idea, a great way to pitch our favorite small cap, micro cap stocks to you guys. So let's just jump right into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as always, guys, research is in the description. Feel free to check it out. As always, not investment advice, just companies we're passionate about. But this one's cool. It was brought to us by a guy named Matt that Ben and I have gotten to know over the last year or so. The company is called Horizon Aircraft, and it's a Canadian company, sort of in the eVTOL space, a little bit adjacent based on their propulsion model, but this is actually area, Ben, you're pretty well versed in, so I'll let you take the reins.
Yeah, sure. So I was first introduced to eVTOLs when I was doing a private equity internship in 2022. The shop invested in a company called Beta, and I looked into the technology from there and became super bullish on it. So, there's a few different things that make eVTOLs what they are, but I think like the overall idea is they are cheaper, easier to run helicopters, and in Horizon's case, they can go faster than helicopters. So it's just a tech advancement that will allow people in our society to just basically use helicopters quite easier to get around. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, it's a super exciting space. I mean, I don't know as much as Ben does, but the idea that you can have this short range air mobility solution is incredible. One of the things we had an opportunity to get on with the CEO of Horizon, his name's Brandon, a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that really came out in our conversations was the idea that there are so many parts, even for Ben and I, right? The U.S. is familiar, right? If you're tuning in from somewhere else globally, right? But what's really interesting is there's so many spots, at least in the U.S., where short distance eVTOL flight paths have a huge value add, right? Ben and I both are from Michigan, and here in Michigan, right, you have a Metro Detroit area. It's where roughly 40-50% of the state's population is. And then you have the rest of the state, right? So you think about the Mitt and the Upper Peninsula, for those of you who remember U.S. geography from fourth grade or whatever. And so a lot of these small places where there's vacation towns and really important industry, they're really only accessible via highways, right? So you could take like I-75, but even inside just one state, Michigan, right, top to bottom of a state's 8 hours, right? EV tolls have a huge value add here, right? Because they take the shortest distance because it's an air path. It's not on roads. You don't have to go around buildings, obviously, and also it helps repurpose what happens to be a really expansive network of small regional airports that exist throughout the United States that were often, I don't even know if decommissioned is the right word. I'm trying to remember the word Brandon used when we were on the phone with him a couple weeks ago, but really, yeah, yeah, it's so underutilized, really since the 70s. So a lot of big, airlines consolidated, control of a lot of these big airports, and the benefit of that was cost savings, but the downside was a lot of the regional transit is now missed, right? And so it's picked up by automobiles and trains, and so this is a really interesting opportunity that Horizon's going after.
And to your point, so I'm pulling this number from NASA. So 1.6% of trips between 50 and 500 miles are taken not by air right now. So there's opportunity for eVTOLs to come in and make those like northern Michigan trips, like you're saying, easier. I went to a place in Maryland previously. It was a 2 hour drive, and I drove by one of these kind of like rundown airports, and I was like, that could easily be a 25-30 minute eVTOL trip. Um, so yeah, and the number is like NASA says there's 5,000 of these airports around. So I think that a company like New Horizon, Archer Joby will be able to just start turning these things into vertiports, through partnerships with various companies. There's one called Skyports that's going to do this, and it's totally going to change the way that we were able to do these like short term trips. So I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, talk a little bit because obviously you're way more familiar, and I'm trying to remember from our conversation. Talk a little more about how their propulsion system's unique and what that means in terms of their ability to get to market.
Yeah, sure. So they are a hybrid aircraft. That's what you're alluding to, correct? Yeah, so they're a hybrid aircraft, whereas Joby and Archer, some of the big names out in the space right now, are fully electric. And they kind of view it as their edge to go into the market and say, hey, yeah, we're a smaller company. Yeah, our market cap's 15 million, but look at this craft of ours and look at the range compared to Joby and Archer. It's twice as much. Look at the speed compared to Joby and Archer, twice as much, as well as the useful load. So there's some of these limitations that Archer, Joby, and Beta are facing out of the gate that New Horizon is just not going to have, which helps their pitch as a smaller, lesser known company. So it's really exciting. And then also to touch on what they're doing too is, and I'm not sure some of the bigger companies do this, but once they get into air, New Horizons craft called the X7, I believe, it turns into a aircraft. So it uses like the helicopter like vertical takeoff, but then once you're flying in the air, it's more so like an actual airplane. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's really one of the important parts here is really this propulsion point, because I mean, one of the big barriers, right, for like, there's a scene from one of the Iron Man movies where Tony Stark goes to Elon Musk in the movie and gives him the idea of electric planes. I don't know if you remember this scene, but the question is, right, like, okay, we have a lot of electric cars, we have a lot of electric, trucks nowadays. Some people are working on electric, like commercial ships, right? So it's like, well, why don't you have electric planes? And the answer is like, the weight ratio of like batteries to propulsion is just not quite there, right? Like from a per unit of energy, one of the cheapest ways to transport energy still is like a gallon of gasoline, like a 5 gallon bucket of gas, right? And so that's really what Horizon's playing to here, right? Their plan in the long run is saying, hey, and this is what a lot of hybrid automotive manufacturers are doing in Japan. Wait for the electrification technology to get there, right? And some of the bigger names in the space, right, are working on that right now. Joby, Archer Aviation, that type of thing. Work on that electric technology getting there. Work on the cost coming down, but get to market today with gas-powered vehicles. And that's the really cool part, I think, in my opinion, and to what you're alluding to, Ben. Um, but even before then, I mean, talk a little bit about what we were hearing from Brandon as well in terms of, kind of their intellectual property and maybe opportunities for them to monetize some of their other tech.
Yeah, sure. So I think that, well, I just want to touch on second mover advantage real quick as well, because I think that's a major, takeaway from our discussion with Brandon. So, the amount of money that Joby and Archer are spending to get their technology commercialized in the U.S. is crazy, and that's actually a good thing for the investment thesis of New Horizon because they're able to just kind of follow in the footsteps of some of these bigger players. Which allows them to just focus on their aircraft. And another thing to touch on too is it makes them unique as well. They are only building the aircraft and selling the aircraft. They are not going down any other verticals. Whereas some of these other eVTOL companies, they're trying to be like the operator themselves. They're trying to do infrastructure themselves. These guys just have the aircraft to worry about. So as the big players lay down the regulatory structures, New Horizon just has to get that prototype ready to go. Check off a few safety boxes, and then they're good to run. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's the exciting part to your point, right? Is that they have an extreme focus on just building the vehicle versus trying to think about the distribution networks, right? And I mean, selling a vehicle and how you sell an EV tool and its distribution networks is important, but transportation networks, right? I mean, there's a reason that Ford doesn't own investments in Lyft or Uber, and General Motors, I want to say, took a loss on their Lyft investment, right? Most automotive companies don't want to be in the mobility rental business, right? They want to be in the business of making uh, uh, machines, right, vehicles, right. And this is, I think, for Horizon, it's no different. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a really interesting company with a cool background. Brandon's background's interesting too. So he used to be in the Canadian Air Force. I want to say he got up to, I'm trying to remember the role he got to. It was, probably about 15 years in the Air Force. This is a space that he's really gotten to understand, though, especially through his experience. He used to fly aircraft for the Canadian Air Force, and so part of his story was like, okay, how do we do better purchasing? How do we succeed with purchasing from a Canadian military standpoint when they're trying to sell, potentially aircraft to the Canadian government, on that side of the coin. But also, how do I understand where the pain points are, for somebody who's trying to build aircraft to traverse, countries like Canada, right? Like, we talked about 5,000 regional airports here in the U.S. Canada is very much the same story because of how sparsely populated the country is. Most of the country's population is within 60 miles to the US border. But a good part of what makes Canada what they are is all the places for natural resources, right? And eVTOLs play a huge role there as well.
Yeah, just quick question off that point. I kind of, think about Buffett's saying, hey, just buy the 500 best US companies and put them away, right? What do you think about these guys being a Canadian company?
I think it's interesting, right? I remember talking, a couple weeks ago with Brandon about that, but I think what was really interesting was the idea that, like, hey, yes, it's a Canadian company, but what's really cool about it is a lot of the certifications that they have to get for flight in Canada are very transferable here to the US, right? So if you want to go to the Canadian regulatory agencies, you want to move it over to the FAA here in the US, that process is not incredibly difficult. And so the power of that is, right, is it's like, okay, here's a great company. It's innovating. Yes, it's not technically in the United States, but its distribution into the United States shouldn't be really difficult, right? And when you talk about, right, buying the best 500 stocks in the US, part of the reason you want to buy the best 500 stocks in the US is the businesses underneath, right? And for a lot of these companies that are the best 500 US stocks, majority of their business is in the United States. And so I would imagine in the long run, the majority of Horizon's business will be in the US as well. Remember correctly, I'm thinking back to the last 10K they filed. The company gets a couple $100,000 a year from innovation grants, actually from the U.S. federal government already. So I think they get a lot of the upside of being a U.S. business, but they're not a U.S. business. So
Yeah. I think a good place to go from here is just like kind of understanding their operating plan. And, obviously I'm very bullish on eVTOLs myself. I think that it's not a matter of if they're successful, it's when they're successful. That's just my personal take through following the industry for a while. But one of my biggest questions pertaining to New Horizon is just how are they going to fight some of these big U.S. companies, right? Archer just raised 300 million from one of the big Wall Street banks, right? So it's going to have to take some grit. So I just think that I definitely think it's possible. But I just want to kind of talk through how that fight's going to look and what your thoughts are.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean, and for everybody watching this as well, right? I mean, the eVTOL space, I mean, Ben and I are completely in consensus. I believe it's a multi-trillion-dollar space by 2050. I think one estimate by Morgan Stanley is like 2.3 trillion or something. I don't know if you had a different number.
I think it was like 9 trillion.
Oh, 9 trillion, even
Yeah,
even better. Yeah, 9 trillion. Um, so it's up to $9 trillion space by 2050, right? So it's not a question of, like Ben said, whether if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen and who's going to be the winners. And again, I think it goes back to the propulsion system. Like, obviously, Horizon's a very small company. I think looking at it today, I want to say it's a 14, 15 million dollar market cap, right? So it's super small. But the benefit for them is because they have this different propulsion system, they should have the ability to get to market a lot quicker, right? Both from a parts licensing standpoint, intellectual property licensing standpoint, and a distribution standpoint, right? Most regional airports in the US are already outfitted with pumps for jet fuel and gasoline, right? Most airports are not yet outfitted with eVTOL straight charging equipment. So they should have an edge on the distribution side, right? Will that help them overcome the fact that they don't have 300 million in the bank, like you said, Archer has? That's the big question, and that's really what investors have to decide when they're thinking about if they want to bet on this stock or not.
and then going back to what we mentioned already, though, it's like Archer needs that money because they're playing so many games right now, right? They're fighting the regulatory landscape that Horizon is just going to kind of follow along. They're doing the infrastructure. They're doing the partnerships with I think Palantir and Anduril. They're doing a lot, right? So I think New Horizon kind of has this opportunity to just be a little bit more frugal and still reach these large goals that they have.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big things that's really important in what you said there is it's because they have the focus. There's a lot of avenues to monetize the business, right? And we've touched on this a few times now in this podcast, but like there are there are opportunities for them to license the core technology they have. There's opportunities to repackage it into, potential other flying devices, right? Whether they're manned or unmanned, right? There's opportunities for their patent portfolio. There's opportunities to sell to defense primes, right? And these aren't things to say like, oh, these are unique things specific to this company. I'm just looking at it as somebody from the outside that's like, hey, here's a company that's figured out lightweight, internal combustion, mobility, transportation, right? Think as an investor of all the hypothetical ways you can monetize that technology, right? And so I don't want to say that's a put option for this company because I don't even remember if this company has an option chain or not, right? But in a way, it helps you think about what helps protect the company's downside. And the answer is, in a lot of cases, their ability to quickly innovate and potentially the ways for them to generate high margin revenue by licensing intellectual property while they focus on this core eVTOL go to market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And then also just laying out to our viewers kind of like their operating plan, like I alluded to. So I think there's a few different milestones that will be important for us as investors to kind of like check the box. So one's going to be like the um, full flight transition. It's called, which is basically it's going to go vertical. Its propellers will transition into the flight mode that I spoke about previously, and then it'll be able to fly its duration, go back into the vertical or the horizontal mode and land, or the vertical mode and land. Sorry. And so once it's able to do one of those full flights, then the next step will be going into a test ready prototype, which will be basically ready to actually take passengers and cargo and whatnot. And then third will be an actual commercial certificate. That will obviously be huge in the market. The market will applaud that tremendously. And then, kind of lastly, is okay, this thing works. What's their manufacturing capacity looking like? And we spoke to Brandon. I think he kind of told us like 300 to 400, which sounds pretty reasonable. Um, so I just think this is a cool opportunity for investors to not necessarily put their entire portfolio in the company, but almost sit back and watch the storyline go, right? As these EV tools become more prevalent in the news, as the different companies achieve their micro goals, it will give us confidence that some of their mega goals will be, possible. And I think it's interesting too because this thing's a $15 million company, right? If they can manufacture and sell 300 of these X7s at 6 million a piece, then that brings their sales easily to the billions, right? And you're buying this as a $15 million company, so the multi bag potential is definitely there for New Horizon, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's the last part of the piece, which is like, how does a company stay capitalized, while they're public? And really for an investor yourself, you're thinking $15 million is a lot of private startups. Why would this company go public? And the answer is the company took a unique route with a SPAC in 2000. I want to say it was 22, if I remember correctly, 23 maybe. Um, but one of the benefits of the SPAC was the ability for them to have a strategic investor that could buy shares in the open market to help bring the company more liquidity. And so as investors, you do have to think about the dilution risk here. I mean, building eVTOLs or any similar type aircraft is a capital intensive business, no doubt, right? What you have to think about on the upside is what Ben just said, right? It's like, okay, eVTOLs directly is their version of an eVTOL directly is a multi-billion-dollar business. Intellectual property licensing is worth a ton of money. Building other types of vehicles is, a huge opportunity. So it's really like you said, can they build the core tech? Can they bring it to market? It's high risk. A lot of this comes up to chance, but if you're looking as an investor, if you're looking for a company that's unique in the space and is not in the billions already pre-revenue, that's not to say again Archer Aviation is a bad company. We're also bullish on them, right? But if you're looking for something a little earlier, potentially high risk, high reward, Archer is on one end of the spectrum, but on a much smaller scale, Horizon is very interesting. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's a cool stock to pair with a portfolio that maybe has an Archer or has a Joby, just for some of that potential upside. But yeah, just one last question for you on that liquidity front. So I looked at their balance sheet. So I think they're sitting at 9 million in cash right now. Looks like their 9 months ended February 28th. They were burning around 6 million in cash. So that's a run rate of around that nine value. Uh, issuing out more shares seems inevitable. How do you kind of view like best case scenario there? What should investors monitor, et cetera? Do you have any advice on this front?
Yeah, I think it really the biggest thing to monitor as an investor is to think a lot about what are, like you said, Ben, what are the milestones that are going to cause the company to be worth a lot more? And I'm not even talking the revenue milestones, right? I'm saying what are the developments in IP, the certification milestones that they should be able to hit that should allow the company to be worth a lot more, so the dilution's a lot less, right? Again, we're looking at a company with no revenue at a 15 million market cap. Archer Aviation, right? Let's keep in mind that also has like almost, I want to say it is no revenue specifically, because I don't think they're doing any SBIR grants or anything. That's a company that's worth billions, right? And the answer is, it's how do you project the story to Wall Street, and how close are you to really scalable milestones? And so I think as we see Horizon get closer to some of those really scalable milestones, I think there's a great opportunity for the stock to potentially re-rate.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks guys for tuning in. This is our first version of the podcast. Ben and I are going to be doing this a lot more. The dream in the future, by the way, give you guys a sneak peek, is it's more than us just recounting stories with executives. Our goal is to give small microcap companies an opportunity to come onto our podcast, talk about their unique stories, and really give them an audience that maybe they wouldn't have outside an investor day at a bank, right? We want to give you guys Wall Street level insights, from the comfort of your couch on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you find this, and our not investment advice, but our opinions and our research, where you can find it on places like Substack and Beehive. So, as always, guys, we thank you for tuning into Marksman Research, and I'll leave the floor to you, Ben. Anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to touch on the flip side to the point you just made. So I think that the reason that we're focusing on these microcap stocks and some small mid caps growth stories as well is we just believe that that's where the life changing returns are for young investors like me and Noah. We're both in our 20s. So not only is there an opportunity to showcase some of these stories that will never get spoken about if people like us don't talk about it. But we also think you as the viewer has a cool opportunity to add some stocks to your watch list that you would otherwise not hear about.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll leave that with one stat, which is, and I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but 85% of stocks that were a 10 bagger, right? So you put $1 in, $10 out, 10 years later, 85% of stocks in the US stock market over the last 10 years that hit that return threshold were small or micro cap stocks. So, as an investor, it's obviously high risk, but when you want to think about a company where you do your homework, you do your due diligence, and you want to think about where the real upside is, it's in the small companies. And you just have to find them, and that's what we're trying to help you do. So, perfect. So, all right. Well, thanks, guys. Till the next episode. Happy investing. Take care.